Coach Robb podcast, answering questions and eliminating frustrations about health, wellness, and performance since 1987.
Welcome to the Coach Robb podcast number 65. Mr. Beams, Coach Robb Beams, how are we doing this sunny Friday afternoon?
Man, we are doing good. It's a little bit chilly here. Looks like you've got your jacket on too.
I
So
do.
it is nice.
Well, Northern California, this should be winter time, but we've been blessed with some decent weather. It's a little brisk out, but it's still nice and bright and sunny. So
There you go. Well, I'm here based in Orlando, Florida, and we finally got below 70 degrees for the first time this year. And since the year's nearly over, it's about time. And so, no, I'm with you, man. It's Michaela and I were out running, and our comment was it's nice to actually focus on running instead of just trying not to die of a heat stroke. And for those of you who don't live in Florida, that may sound like I'm boohooing, but it just gets old, man. Every time you go out, it's all about, managing the heat instead of actually enjoying the process of running fast. So I'm
yeah,
with you, brother. It's a good time of the year.
it's crazy, Coach. The holidays are upon us.
Yeah.
It's crazy how fast this year has gone. This is the time of year that we get into vacation mode and holiday mode and things like that. And today's topic is really cool. Before we get into it, I do want to thank all of our viewers and subscribers here on YouTube. If you're listening to us on an audio form, thank you guys so much. Please make sure you guys share, like and share, hit the subscribe button down below. That helps us out. And always, Coach, we say this every time, always leave comments or questions down in the comments field. It helps us. We like to address your guys' concerns, questions, and we'd love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, please do. And we can't express that sincerely enough. And not that anybody cares about what I do on a daily basis, but literally, I have it on my to-do list every single day to check comments in YouTube because I think it's very important if you're going to take the time, even if it's constructive feedback, like you said before, we have thick skin. If you think we're full of shit, that's fine. Talk to us. You know what I mean? But the idea here is if you follow us on Instagram and if you follow us obviously here on YouTube on a regular basis, we're dropping a video every day answering questions, trying to address frustration. So not only do you and I incorporate it into our podcast together, but I try to make sure that people don't have to wait 3 or 4 months to get their subject matter covered, if you will. We try to do a deep dive on a very specific frustration, a question, or a topic every single day on YouTube. Some are a couple days a week, they're in shorts in the evening. A couple days a week, they're dropped first thing in the morning as a 3 to 5 minute video. I always and Dan, while I've got everybody's attention, when we're doing those 3 to 5 minute videos, I always want the end result is that people understand the why behind, hey, why do my hamstrings always hurt? Well, if you understand the why they hurt, then when we go to the component that essentially alleviates the pain, it's not just about go do this. It's about why does it hurt? So that way you can break that pattern. But then, so think about that as a bouncing ball. Don't just do it and not understand what you fixed. Understand what's causing it as well as how to fix it. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. We always want you to understand the why does my low back hurt? Tight quads. Should I stretch my low back? No, you should foam roll your quads. That's a perfect example. Difference between a pain site and a pain source. So if you haven't followed or watched any of our videos, you'll notice that's what we're here to do. It's what we strive to do in every video. So thank you for bringing that up, Dan, and we definitely appreciate everybody.
Well, I love the YouTube shorts, Coach. I love the Instagram videos because I get to see your beautiful face every day because I don't get to see you every day. It's when we do the pod, we see each other, but I appreciate those and I look forward to those every day. So let's get into it. We talked about the holidays. The holidays are upon us. Behaviors change. Coach, you've been around a long time. You've studied the behaviors of people over the years, and there's 7 specifically that are very surprising, and we have that list today to go over.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you that follow us in the different sports that we're involved in, without bringing anybody's specific name or their identity or anything like that, every sport that we're involved in, what we've been trying to do is build a medical database that is really, really at the organic level of athleticism. So, for example, for those of you that follow us in the motorcycle environment, how heavy should you be jumping from a 250 to a 450? Is there an ideal strength to weight ratio? Like when I was working with Adam C. and Mitch plucked him from an 85 Super Mini and put him on a factory 250. We had never seen something like that in the sport. And, talking with Mitch and that whole process, that's probably the best example I can give everybody. So when we say that we've studied the behaviors associated around the holidays, I find it absolutely fascinating. And that's why I wanted to share it with everybody here today is when we look at the holidays, what comes out of it has been just an incredible journey because yeah, we can joke about the in-laws and the outlaws, and we can joke about gaining weight and all this other stuff. But what you'll see after today's webinar is when you get through, we call them the big three, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, what actually is the end result of those three big holidays is almost the antithesis of what most people anticipate it's going to be. And that's why I wanted to share these top 7. I mean, literally for 20 years, we've been keeping very meticulous notes on, and we'll talk about each one of them one by one, but we literally have data files of all of this information. I'll share a little bit on the Garmin dashboard today. We won't bore anybody, but we want to make sure that you guys understand it because as we said, like on the Instagram videos, here on YouTube as well, what our goal is when we talk about a subject, and if you're running the Garmin platform, how would you be able to evaluate your response to the holidays? So that's going to be the big takeaway. So if you're listening to this in a podcast platform, you might want to take some time and go back, maybe timestamp when we talk about a reference to Garmin. Because like I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I don't want to bore people, but I definitely want our listeners to go away with some real nuggets on where they can personally go look at their dashboard and take these concepts and really take and leverage them to the stratosphere and back.
Looking at the list here, Coach, there's 7 of them, and I'm looking at these. I'm like, yep. And I'm like, wow, okay, yeah, that makes sense, but in the same sense is a little bit shocking. Let's get into the first one: accidental athletic improvement.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to hear about this one because a lot of times during the holidays, especially coming up to Christmas, right? It's real easy to get off of your program if you're on any type of training program or diet or anything like that, right? And typically, if you're an athlete, right, you know, like I don't get to ride as much during the holidays with family things and things going on. So, but you could see an athletic improvement and just really not know it. It's like an accident.
It really, really is. And that's why when we were talking about this as a staff, it's listening to the clients. Like part of our business is we do one-on-one calls. So at our expert level with my clients, I'm on their schedule for a definitive day and time, and they're on my schedule, and it's the same every week, right? And so what we do is, hey, how's the week going? How are the holidays treating you? We go and we look at the Garmin dashboard. We compare them against the goals. So Dan, yourself, let's say that you're coming off of World Vets in November, and now maybe you're training for Daytona in March. For those of you that are in the moto environment, those dates will kind of resonate with you. So what we look at is we go, okay, we know that you're going to be having friends and family over. You may be going over and spending time with your wife's family as well. As you just articulated, some of the quote unquote normal schedule is going to get bumped. You might be at somebody's house, you might be in another city, you might be in another part of the country. What we noticed is, Dan, let's say that you just decided, and I'm going to use the easiest example and one that we see and hear the most about is, hey, I went to my in-laws, I went to my, my families and friends, and they decided we were going to do a turkey trot 5K. And maybe you've been training for Boston or New York and you've been putting in all this mileage. Well, now you start spending some time with friends and family. You start sleeping more than you normally do, right? Because you don't have to wake up tomorrow. You're there for the long weekend. You might be there for 5 days. So what happens is now you start sleeping more. You start eating foods that a lot of people, and particularly mainstream media, likes to say, well, that's unhealthy eating. Now, again, Dan, you and I are not talking about eating exclusively buttery croissants and a bunch of boxed, anything that comes out of a box has a ton of preservatives in it. But you think about the typical Thanksgiving meal, home cooked turkey, you've got homemade mashed potatoes, you've got your green bean casserole. I could go through all of the stuff, but if you're getting the different food items that we just mentioned, if like the mashed potatoes is probably the easiest. Think about how good mashed potatoes are for you using whole milk, real butter, and potatoes. Now, before anybody leaves us a nasty comment, we understand that white potatoes are very high on the glycemic index. But I don't know about you, I prefer white potatoes over sweet potatoes at Thanksgiving. That's what I prefer. Do I eat them all the time? No. But you see where I'm going with this, right?
Yep.
So the idea is now you're eating good food that's been homemade. I would say probably 75 to 80% of it is legitimately homemade. You're not buying a store pre-packaged mashed potatoes. More than likely, you're making your own. You know, you're cooking your stuff in your own turkey and doing it your own. You're making your own green bean casserole, as I mentioned. So you start stacking all of that up, and then you and I decide, hey, let's go run this turkey trot tomorrow morning just for fun. Because there's absolutely zero pressure, and all of a sudden you stack what I call newfound rest, and you're eating food that's homemade, people start stamping. Some people refer to them as PRs. Some of our European friends refer to them as PBs, personal best. Without even trying, you go out and you end up running faster than you've ever run a 5K before. And this is why I call it the accidental success. You weren't tapering for it. You weren't specifically training for it. What was the genesis behind why was I able to run faster? Didn't even really matter because you're in a low stress, nutritious, rested state of mind. Think about how powerful that is. So that's why we refer to it as the holiday accidental success. If all of a sudden, for those of you who cycle, you decide you're going to hook up with a group ride, you're able to go further, faster before you start to get tired. Why is that? Because you're fed and you're extremely rested and you have a low stress number. Now, Dan, one of the things that you and I've spoken about when you and I are just, shooting the bull during the week together, isn't it crazy when you have a low stress environment and you're eating and you're sleeping, quote unquote, more than you normally do? Is it ironic that all of a sudden now our group rides are easier? They're faster. I hate to use the word easy because when you're in a group ride, it's always difficult. But again, it's like, how many times have we discussed on our podcast here together? How many of our listeners are literally running third gear pinned? They're right on the verge of dehydration. They're on the verge of just calorie, you know, destroying. Their calorie gap is too big. They're running on 5 to 6 hours because they've got a growing family and they've got job responsibilities. My hands up in the air. I've been there before.
Yep.
And yet all of a sudden the only shift was you went home or you went with friends and family, started getting some more sleep, some high quality homemade food, and then the athletic performance just takes off on its own. And people are like, what in the world? And it's interesting because a lot of times we associate, which we'll talk about here, a lot of times we start thinking about the holidays and where do we go? Right into guilt mode. Oh, I shouldn't be
Yep.
eating this, shouldn't be eating that. And we're going to talk about why shouldn't you be eating that? That's something that's very important that people, as a takeaway from today's podcast. What do you mean you shouldn't be eating something? We'll talk about that here in a moment.
Well, I'm looking forward to winter closure in my work because I will have no stress because I've been extremely stressed as of late. So
Yep.
I'm hoping, for me, that's what it is um, in my personal life with my performance and improving is when I'm stressed and I got a lot of things going on,
Yep.
it's hard for me to focus, right? It's hard for me to
Sure.
focus on, writing or working out or anything like that. So once I'm able to get this little break here through the holidays, I'm hoping to leave my stress behind where I can, get back to work and kind of improve.
Well,
Um,
it's very important because on that subject of stress, remember that when your stress level goes up, that's going to automatically suppress your appetite. And think about what a vicious cycle this is. You need the nutrients to keep your brain functioning properly. You need the nutrients to keep your body healthy from the inside out. You need nutrients to be able to fuel your workout. And yet the stress is suppressing your appetite. So because you don't get that little mechanism in your brain that reminds you that you need to eat, you end up going 6, 7 hours without eating. You see how just creates a
yep,
compounding problem. Stress is ugly. And that's why if you guys are running the Garmin platform, look at your stress score. Your goal is to keep it on average below 25. And I know that's a lot easier said than done for some of you, but that's what I would encourage you to try to, strive for as soon as possible.
Number two, this one makes sense to me. Improve sleep quality and quantity. So, Coach, that means, like you said, stress, right? I can
Yep.
get a good night's sleep without having to worry about things in the middle of the night that may or may not have happened at work or in my business or whatever, right? And I can actually sleep in a little bit because I don't have to get up for work. So
Yep.
I see this one.
Yeah, this is for those of you who have followed me for any period of time, this is probably the easiest example of the vacation test. When you don't have, when you go on vacation, hopefully your schedule is to have no schedule. That would be the ideal vacation for everybody. I know it's difficult when maybe you go on a cruise for your vacation and you're following a pretty strict, itinerary. But what we always like to encourage our athletes is, when was the last time your schedule was to have no schedule? And you could take it away from a vacation and just say this weekend, coming up this weekend, or when was the last weekend that you went into Friday night saying, you know what, literally until Monday morning, our schedule is to have no schedule. Dan, you've got a small growing family. We understand that's been a while. All right. Your child still has many years. She's still very young, but she still has many years ahead of her. And that's the thing that I want people to stop and think about in this regards. And that is, when all of a sudden grandma can take care of Ayla, well, guess what? You and your bride can go and lay down. And even if Ayla gets up, what does she want? She wants to go hang out with grandma and grandpa, right? So for you psychologically, your daughter is safe. She's taken care of, her needs, wants, and desires. So what that does is that takes a rock out of your backpack. And then when you and your bride lay down, guess what? That pressure comes off of your throat. Because if anyone who's listening has a child, you know how it is. You could have a hurricane come by, you don't hear it, but you can hear that child's little feet pat across the floor, right? It's just the way we're wired. So when it comes time to where we do have an opportunity, and I know it's a little bit repetitive when you look at 1 and 2, but when you get to number 2, stress is removed. You go to bed with no schedule, and all of a sudden the body just goes, oh, okay, this is cool. Now, ironically, you're eating good food. What satisfies appetite? Protein and fat. What are you making all your food items with? Whole ingredients, real food. You see where it becomes a win-win right off the bat.
Yeah.
Now, when you go to bed, your psyche knows it doesn't have to wake up to an alarm. So then you sleep in until you're rested. And this is where cortisol, the listeners may know it as the circadian rhythm. What circadian rhythm, if we get down into some blood chemistry, when you get to the end of the day, your cortisol level should just naturally be low. And then as your body rejuvenates during the night, your cortisol levels naturally elevate. And then you wake up naturally, you wake up without an alarm, and you wake up with a tremendous amount of energy. That's the ideal scenario. I want our listeners to answer that question, or rather ask themselves that question. When was the last time you woke up without an alarm and felt fresh? And it usually, I hate to say it, most of it, again, this is 20 years of research. Most people will say, well, last Christmas, last Thanksgiving, maybe I went home for New Year's. That's why we call them the big three, because whether you get a couple of weeks off for work, or you schedule it with your family, your bride, it's a win-win-win, because Ayla's out of school. Both you and your bride may have a couple of weeks of vacation worked up. So now you can go visit grandma and grandpa, or aunts and uncles, or just some dear friends. That's where you start seeing these start to stack on top of each other. The behavior is, wow, I went out and we ran a turkey trot 5K together, Dan. We set a PR. How the heck did that happen? Hey, wait a second. Why am I sleeping so good all of a sudden? What are you eating? What's your stress levels like?
Yeah.
It's
It makes sense.
crazy. So cool to see it happen. And literally, for lack of better terminology, it's like carbon copy year over year.
I have a question about the sleep. I've been meaning to actually ask you about this before, but
Yeah.
this is a good tee up. Talk about cortisol. When you go to sleep at night, your
Mm-hmm.
cortisol levels are low. When you wake up in the morning, your cortisol levels are high.
Yes.
If you don't get a good night's rest, where you toss and turn, or you just never get into that deep sleep, does your cortisol levels stay low?
No. What it is, and I don't want this to, why are you tossing and turning? Because if you're tossing and turning because of stress associated with work, your cortisol levels will actually be higher than usual, because unfortunately, the stress at work is like small little car wrecks. If you're calorically restricted, or if you're chronically dehydrated, your body cannot differentiate between, all your body knows is that it's under stress. So if I can get you, Dan, and if it doesn't make sense for the sake of our listeners, please elaborate, let me know. So let me elaborate on it. put it back in absolute terms of mechanical. So you and I roll a motorcycle or a car off of the dealership floor, but we drain the radiator and we drain the oil and we start to ride it. And we start to notice that it's starting to lose its power, but it's a brand new bike. It's because the bike is starting to be exposed to stress. We would know it mechanically as heat, and that heat is coming from a lack of oil and or radiator fluid. Well, it doesn't matter what the hour meter says. The stress in the system is still there, and you can physically feel the stress in the mechanical device. Well, now put that in terms of being a human being. You're laying in bed and I hate to say it because we hear it all the time, but I can't turn my brain off. That's a problem. Okay. Because like we said, if your cortisol levels are at a natural low when you're getting ready to go to bed, you should be like an infant. When your head hits the bed and your appetite is satisfied, hunger is satisfied, you should be out like a light. Now, go back to your original statement question. If you're sitting there burning and churning, and I hate to be negative, but let's say you and your partner, not you, but let's say one of our listeners, you and your partner got in a little bit of a scrap before going to bed. Heart rate's going to
it
be
could be
elevated.
me, Coach Robb. It could be me. It happens.
It happens, right? It happens to the best of us. And I mean this very sincerely. When you and I were growing up and your grandfather said, if I can ever give you words of advice, never go to bed angry. It's amazing how profound that advice really was because of what you just mentioned. Cortisol is a byproduct of fight or flight. Now, this is where it's like electrolytes. People go, wait, electrolytes help me absorb fluid, but electrolytes are key for muscle contraction. They have dual roles. Cortisol has not really two roles, but it has two influences in our life. When we almost get in a car wreck and we get that flushed feeling, that's cortisol rushing into the system as part of the fight or flight. That's negative cortisol levels. When you're talking about cortisol as an arousal hormone, at the end of the day, you should be exhausted, right? And when I say exhausted, physically, you've worked hard as a man. Emotionally, you've invested in with your daughter and with your wife, your bank account, you work really hard to save more than you spend. You've worked out, you've kept the stress levels, the volume, the intensity, duration, you've kept that in sync. At the end of the day, you should be tired. You should be ready to go to bed like a farmer, right? Up with the sun, go to bed with the sun. You put in a good day's work, you feel like you've been productive, you should be ready to go to bed. When we look at cortisol, and I think what you said is so important for the listeners, why are you laying in bed, tossing and turning? First thing I have to look at as a physiologist is calorie gap, dehydration. Did you satisfy hunger before going to bed? Is the room dark and cold? Okay, now you've checked off all the boxes. Why are you not sleeping? And that's where we go without muddling in your private business. I go into the Garmin and I look at your stress score literally on a per hour, per minute from sunrise to sunset. We literally, let me share my screen real quick while we're talking about it. And hopefully this will make a little bit more sense. And if you've got the Garmin, you've got this, okay? When you come up to your Garmin, and this is just so you know where I'm at, I'm on daily summary here on the left-hand side. And if you don't use the computer, I would encourage you to be open-minded to doing it because there's a lot more information you can extrapolate from the computer. If you look right here, it's connect.garmin.com. It's a lot of people have reached out to me and said, hey, I went to garmin.com and couldn't find it. It's connect.garmin.com. So Dan, at the very top of this report, this is literally if you look at the screen, Dan, can you see it okay on your side?
Yep.
12A to 12A. This is literally a 24-hour period. Okay. So I can see like this is a client, this is Thursday. So this would essentially be Wednesday coming into Thursday morning at midnight. And then it would be ending your day Thursday going into Friday. Well, if you come down here, they have a stress machine. And of course, it's going to make a liar out of me because it's not popping up on this particular one. Maybe it'll pop up on this guy here. Garmin has shifted it around a little bit. So let's take a look here. All right. So as you can see, this is just it did pop up. See how this is called daily summary? On the left-hand side of the connect box, it's right here. And then all you do is you scroll down to where the stress is at. What's interesting is let's go back a day since this day is not completely over. All right. And when we get down here and we start looking at stress, what becomes so incredible is you literally will get your stress score on a per hour basis. Why is it eluding me again? And this is what's so incredibly important when you're trying to figure out, where does my stress come from? If you put your mouse on this, I don't know if you can see, Dan, hopefully the listeners can as well. See how it literally will give you a minute by minute by minute stress score. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my mouse to the left of this. I'm going to hold the left mouse and I'm just going to drag and release. And what it does, it lets me drill in, which makes it a little bit easier to see minute by minute by minute. So Dan, what this allows the listener to be able to do is, hey, what was I doing from 8:40 in the morning until 9 o'clock where my stress level went really, really high? Okay. So when I come back here and I go and I look at your sleep, this is where I've teased you before that I don't like government at all. This is where I always say Garmin's a little bit too much like Big Brother for me, because what I'm able to do, if I go here to the stages, I can actually come underneath here and I can see the, why is it not giving it to me as an option? Bear with me here 1 second. Here we go. If I use the timeline mode, just so everybody knows where I'm at, I'm under health stats, under sleep. Make sure that you toggle to timeline. And then what you can do is you can come in here and you can click on this button called awake or restlessness. And Dan, you see these little black hash marks?
Mm-hmm.
That's how many times you rolled over during that block of sleep. So going back to like what you were saying, if all of a sudden I see 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, it normally will correlate with a high stress level. Is you asked a very benign question. If I toss and turn, is my cortisol level going to be low? No, because obviously cortisol, if you look at it from the standpoint of a fight or flight, cortisol is floating around in your bloodstream as a stimulant, like we're under stress. There's some level of duress going on in the body. What I want to look at is, and this is a kind of a creepy way for me to go and look at, how many times did you toss and turn from when you went to bed at 8:37, and this isn't your board, I'm just calling it out. You went to bed at 8:37 until you woke up. Okay. What this allows me to be able to see is, and I do it quite often, and this is what we do as an analytics company. What I want to be able to see is how many times did you toss and turn per sleep block? And for those of you who have body battery, look at the line. This is what it would look like for you, Dan, if you were tossing and turning all night long. See how the body battery didn't even get over 30?
Yep.
So it's not a figment of your imagination. When you say to me, hey, Rob, like for example, right here, here's a stress report or that we can look at. And if you're listening to this in a podcast, what I'm doing is I'm just drilling down. You can find this on your phone. I'm just illustrating to the viewers on YouTube here the stress numbers, because what's pretty cool about this, Dan, is if we go and we look at the last 7 days, you get this nice little gray dot that says your stress level, which by the way, this individual actually had a huge motorcycle accident on December the 2nd. Huge motorcycle accident, high speed get off. Didn't destroy the motorcycle, but is about 50% needs to be replaced. Subframes, triple clamps, just all kinds of carnage. He literally hit a pothole, caused his elbow to drop, grabbed a handful of throttle, sent him off the back of the bike, landed straight on his bum and hit his bum. And then the amount of inertia went from bum right over onto his shoulder and his head.
Oh, wow.
Okay. The reason why I want to share that with everybody is, if you're looking at this right here, obviously he's bouncing around the 45 to 50 average. We want stress levels to be down here below 25. So if I go and I look at the 4 weeks, you can see this is where he got in an accident on December the 2nd. Look how the stress level went up to a 55.
Yeah.
And what was interesting is we were working extremely hard to get his average stress score down. Look, he's hovering around the 20, 37, 35, 37 range. And we're like, okay, cool. Because for the sake of the listeners, when you're looking at stress, what your goal is to keep the deviations to a minimum. So like right here, we had 3 consecutive days where it was pretty low. You go, yeah, but what about this one over here? I would consider that an anomaly, because that's the lowest we've seen in an entire month. But when you get 3 consecutive days, And we finally were getting it. And then he got injured. And look how it shot up. And since his injury, look how he's been bouncing around the 40, 45 mark.
Interesting.
Yep. And so that's what's pretty powerful about the Garmin is when you've got the heart rate data, when you've got stress score, when you have HRV, when you have resting heart rate, we've talked about this on the show together, Dan. I have people that say, hey, is a 45 resting heart rate good? Oh, it's awesome if it used to be 50. It's not so good if it used to be 41. And that's where I want to go back to, again, you asked a very benign question. If I'm tossing and turning, is my cortisol low? No, it's going to be high. But if you understand that cortisol is a byproduct of stress, my job as an analyst from both a physiological standpoint and from a straight analytical standpoint, my job is to help you find what the genesis is behind it. Calorie gap,
Makes sense.
hydration. And then if it's not that, I can only really dig down on training, volume, intensity, and frequency. And then once we eradicate that, then we have to jump into what's going on financially, what's going on in your relationships, what's going on at work or school. It's not that we're muddling in business, anybody else's personal business. It's about giving our listeners an understanding of what in the world is my body going through. Because I hate to say it, Dan, but most of our listeners, if you've been married for more than 5 years, if you've been in the business world, either as an employee or an employer, you don't realize how desensitized you are to stress. Think about it, Dan, when you had your routes.
Yeah.
You were so numb to a 19, 20-hour day. You were so numb with the politics. You were so numb with the rogue customers, and then
Yep.
you hit your numbers, and what do they do the next year? Raise your
Want
numbers.
more.
They
Yep.
want more, right?
Always.
You're just that freaking little hamster on a treadmill, never making anybody happy, but you become desensitized to it. And that's
Yeah.
what I want our listeners to understand. We're talking about holiday behaviors. Look at the first two. My gosh, how did I set a PR? How did I get a personal best? Why am I sleeping so good? Oh, what a novel idea. Are we living remotely close to our perfect day? We'll come
Well,
back to that as well.
I want you to explain number 3 to me because this one doesn't necessarily make sense to me in the
Yep.
holidays, but that is a decrease in body weight.
Yep, you're exactly right. And the only reason why we see people losing body weight during the holidays is it goes back to the idea that you're going and visiting with friends or family, or you're having friends and family come over. And this is the time of the year that we see people will take the time to cook with real raw food. We teased a little bit about it with Thanksgiving with the mashed potatoes. It's real butter, whole milk, potatoes. And when was the last time you made, and I'm asking this to all of our listeners, think about the last time you made homemade potatoes. When's the last time you made, think about brining the turkey. Think about the process involved with that. Now I'm sounding really sophisticated, right? I don't do it. Michaela does it. Here's my extent of getting the turkey done for Thanksgiving. I walk out, I go into the garage, I get a cooler, I bring it in. She creates the brine solution. She puts the turkey in it, and then she asks me to rotate it X amount of hours later. And then I show up the next day and I've got a golden turkey. I do carve the turkey, but outside of that, don't let me sound like a gourmet chef. I just watch my beautiful wife. She loves to do it. She enjoys it. But think about it from the listener standpoint. When was the last time you took that much time to make a meal? And this is why we're going to talk a little bit more about it here in a moment, Dan. But the idea is slow down. If you start looking at the importance of food, quality and quantity, when was the last time you didn't have to run through a drive-through? And remember, if you're running through, like, I don't know, out in California, Dan, do you guys have Boston markets out there?
Not anymore. We used to, but I know it's a
Yeah.
chicken place, right?
Yeah, it's a chicken
Yep.
place, and people can run through there and you can get the mashed potatoes and the mac and cheese and the chicken and all. You got to remember, whenever something's in mass production, it's not going to be as good as what you're going to make at home. Now, I'm a personal believer of like a Chipotle or a Kubota or a Boston Market is definitely going to be better than a burger joint. You know what I mean? Now, if you're going someplace where you're getting an Angus burger and the burger's $12 or $14, so you know the quality is there, you get the gist of what we're going with here.
Yep.
But that's why we find people are losing weight during the holidays because they're eating high quality fat and high quality protein. And those are the two macronutrients that satisfies hunger. So what happens is people eat less and it catches people off guard. And this is what I was alluding to at the beginning of the conversation, Dan. A lot of times people have this guilty association with Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. because over here are some adult beverages, and over here are some cookies and some pies and some cakes that we don't normally see, right? And heaven forbid if we grab the piece of that pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving, or we grab a Christmas cookie, and our little, I call it the little negative canary on our shoulder, starts chirping really loud. My thing is, start looking at your Garmin scale. What's it showing? My experience has been when you're eating good homemade meals, people have a tendency to drop body fat. They have a tendency to drop body weight, which is pretty surprising for a lot of people. Again, these are just byproducts of the holidays that catches people off guard. And they're like, how could I have eaten the way I did with my friends and family and actually lost weight? It's because your behavior. That's why this list is so incredibly important.
Coach, I'm going to jump from number 3 to number 6 because
Okay.
this is the contradictory one that we
Okay.
talked about. And this one I probably fit better in because I have a little bit of extra winter weight right now. But this is an increase in body weight. And I think we can all, at some point, right, Coach Robb, we've all increased our body weight at the holidays at some point, right? We just
Absolutely.
overindulge and we eat all the sugar and the candy and the hot
Yep.
chocolate, and right, we just go overboard. We've all done that.
Yep.
I probably do it more often than I should, but this one definitely makes sense to me.
It's not gonna make sense to you in about 30 seconds.
Okay, let's do
All
it.
right. And the reason being is if people are losing weight because they're eating high quality proteins and fats and it satisfies hunger, and at the end of the holiday window, right? Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, we see them losing weight. You say, but Rob, then why is one of the behaviors people would gain weight? Is it an overeating issue? And to your point, Dan, I'll give my experience is I would say probably less than 10% of our listeners legitimately overeat. Now I know there's going to be some people who are shaking their head listening to this going, you don't know me, buddy. When I do holiday, I do it big. Okay, that's cool. But here's where I want a paradigm shift. If you Google, they will say that a pound of fat is roughly 3,500 calories. So let's just use an even number. Let's say that you gain 2 pounds, and let's do it over a tight window of time. Let's say you do that over 3 days, right? You show up at your parents' house on a Friday, you get home on a Monday morning. So you've been there for about 2.5, 3 days, and you're up 2 pounds. Did you legitimately eat 7,000 extra calories? And you say, oh, but I ate a lot. I understand, but stick with me here. It goes back to that negative canary bird. Because what I want to encourage people, and I'm not a helicopter snowflakey kind of guy, you're not gaining weight on the scale in the form of raw body fat. Because even if you were to sit right now and eat 7,000 excess calories today, it would not be converted to body fat by tomorrow morning. And it's very important that the listeners take that nugget of information and run with it. When we're looking at an increase in body weight of 2 pounds, 3 pounds in one day, it's a combination of a few things. Number one, and Dan, you just said it yourself, if you eat a lot of sugar, sugar has an inflammatory response on the body. That's number one. That's why we have our athletes weigh themselves every morning and every night. Your morning weight against morning weight is always about inflammation and swelling, whether that's from exercise or food. We're pretty much, I think all of us would concede, I ate a bunch of sugar, I drank some adult beverages. Sure, your scale is going to be up 2 or 3 pounds, but it's not body fat. It's mathematically impossible. Now, if we go the next step, if the body weight is up 3 to 5 pounds and it is an inflammatory response to food, where did the food come from? Now we're back to sugar. It's very rarely that you ate an entire pumpkin pie. It's going to be a sliver of a pumpkin pie with those mashed potatoes, with a couple adult beverages, and then a handful of desserts later. I'm integrating both Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? Christmas cookies, pie, and maybe some mashed potatoes. So what ends up happening is if you do that from Thanksgiving, and now we're going to get into the nitty gritty. You started at Thanksgiving and you put 3 to 5 pounds on. Is it pounds of water? Is it pounds of inflammation, or is it pounds of fat? If we're talking 3 days, you gained 3 pounds. It wasn't like you gained 3 pounds in 3 days and then you went home and you gained another 3 pounds in 3 days. And then by the time we got to January, you were 10 pounds heavier. Here's the catch. When you look at Nutrition 101, when you eat what we refer to as a carbohydrate, so just for illustration purposes, imagine that you eat an apple. That's an edible carbohydrate. When your body takes an edible carbohydrate and converts it to stored sugar, our listeners know it is glycogen, fancy word for stored sugar. You have two gas tanks in the human body. Your liver feeds your brain and your muscles feed movement. So I eat an apple, that apple gets converted to stored sugar in the form of glycogen in my liver and my muscles. But what a lot of the weight gain is that everybody's experiencing is you're eating more carbohydrates than you normally do. Think about like a croissant. You may not be a staple of your product, but it's a carbohydrate. It has some sugar in it. Could you have an inflammatory response to it? Sure. But when you convert an edible carbohydrate to stored sugar, your body retains 2.5 to 2.8 grams of water. It doesn't take very long for you to put on a pound of water retention as a byproduct of eating carbohydrates. So think about all of our sweet goods. Think about your typical plate at Christmas and New Year's. Think about your typical plate at Thanksgiving. Now you've got a broad spectrum of colors that has a lot of carbohydrates. Nothing wrong with salads. There's nothing wrong with the steamed vegetables. But is that really your mainstay at Thanksgiving? No, you're going over to the casseroles. You're going over the potatoes. You're going, well, that's just all carbohydrates. And the carbohydrates cause you to retain water. And Dan, that's why I was kind of teasing you a little bit. You notice that you might be 3 or 4 pounds heavier after Thanksgiving, and then you get a good week of training and riding. Where does that body weight go? It goes right back to where you were before you were at Thanksgiving. So that's where you got to shut the little canary up on your shoulder and go, have I really put on 3 pounds of fat in 3 days? No, it's mathematically impossible.
Hey, sometimes you just got to enjoy life.
Well, and that's what I want the listeners to understand. And I've said it publicly, and I'm going to reiterate it here. You need to indulge on birthday cake, anniversary cake, Christmas cookies, Thanksgiving pies, because you only get that one time a year. Stop and think about that. And now this is where your consistency for the other 11 and a half months out of the year, when you don't normally eat that way, now we get into, I know it sounds fluffy, but that's where we start looking at the benefit of our rewards, right? It's just like anything, Dan. If I give away my coaching program to somebody, they're not going to really be invested in it. Why? Because there's no perceived value because you didn't have to give up something to get the schedule.
Right.
And that's why, and I don't say this to be arrogant or whatsoever, but we have an expensive coaching program. And that's because when people invest in themselves, then what happens is they go, okay, because I've paid, it's typical human psychology. If I'm going to pay $300 to $500 for a coaching program, I'm going to be more invested because to me, I've put some skin in the game. And I say this very respectfully. I have never, ever gotten into the game of being the lowest price guy on the street, and I never will.
Yeah.
And the reason being is if you study human behavior, if you get something cheap, we don't give anything away. And here's a little side story. As a business, and if you don't have a faith base, please forgive me for this, but we've always tried to go the route of give a percentage of our business back, just like, tithing. And so every year we would take how much money we made, we'd take that percentage and we would go out and we would gift our coaching services, and not one person ever followed through on the program. Just to validate the concept, right? So if we come back full circle, when you're looking at investing in Christmas and New Year's, if you don't do, or in Thanksgiving, if you don't eat that way all the time, it's a treat. It's a reward. That's what holidays are all about. And I agree with you, Dan. Lean in hard.
Yeah.
And by the way, when we talk about those adult beverages, those are carbohydrates. There's not an adult beverage that doesn't, well, I guess you could get kind of, if you want to get nitpicky, if you did hard liquor on just straight rock, on the rocks, I guess if you want to say the alcohol does break down to sugar eventually. But for the most part, our quote unquote weight gains are going to be water retention associated with carbohydrates far more than eating a plethora of quote unquote fatty foods. That's where the weight gain come in.
Next one on the list, we kind of skipped over this because I wanted to go about to the one about getting fat like I am at the moment, but is a decreased appetite.
Yep. And it's very simple. We can keep this conversation point pretty minimal, but I did want to bring it up as a behavior that we've seen come out because it's some of the feedback that we hear most often. I had all this beautiful food around me and I actually didn't have an appetite to eat it. Now, if you go back, if you're taking notes, which I hope everybody does during our webinars together and our podcast together, if you're looking at number one, the idea that you have athletic improvement, why is that? Because you're eating fruits, you're eating vegetables, you're eating high quality homemade foods, which satisfies the hunger. Well, now what ends up happening is because you don't have an appetite, because you've satisfied it, people are like, I had all this food around me. And ironically, I noticed that I wasn't eating it. Why? Because you've already satisfied hunger. There is a very dangerous delay between your stomach being full and your brain getting notification of it. This is why we get so miserable when we quote unquote overeat. This is why we encourage you as a listener of the show. And I know that, again, it sounds like fifth grade, right? But every time you put something in your mouth, put your fork down. Take the time to focus on chewing your food. Don't make it baby mush. Actually chew your food, because otherwise the fork just becomes a shovel and you just start hoovering it in there. So the idea here is if you keep putting the fork down, you're going to be eating high quality foods. You're going to satisfy hunger at the precise time that you have just the broadest spectrum of food that you've probably seen all year long. But it is an external feedback that we get like, man, I was frustrated. There was all this food available and I literally wasn't hungry. And most people know how miserable they feel when they overeat. So depending on where you're at in that spectrum, hopefully you don't allow yourself to overeat. Not as a slap on the wrist, just why have that feeling of being miserable?
Yeah.
So that's why the appetite is suppressed.
This one is the next bullet point. I think we can all relate to this one because that is either an increase or a decrease in stress over the
Yes,
holidays. And man, that stress is so many different things, right?
you're exactly right. And since we've been on the show here now for almost 45 minutes, I think the listeners are starting to see where there's a cross germination between all of these. Because when we're looking at stress, we just talked about the idea that if you don't normally eat foods that have a lot of processed sugars, and now you're having a piece of cake, pie, cookie, whatever, your body is going to be like, and I'm very trepidatious to use this word, but simple sugar is a poison, right? And so it's very difficult for our body to not really to break down sugar, but it does create a lot of inflammatory responses. So all of a sudden now you're sitting here going, okay, I've got a tremendous amount of stress. I'm looking at my body weight in the morning and it keeps going up. Is that because of an inflammatory response from the food or from the exercise? Well, hopefully during the holidays, you might be doing a little bit of maintenance stuff, but you're really leveraging the opportunity to be with friends and family. So you have to kind of lean towards the food category is causing the stress within the system to go up. Now, everybody in the house gets a few adult beverages in them. Liquid courage gets cranked up, and then people start reminiscing about things. And now the in-laws and the outlaws, Hatfields and McCoys begin, and then ho ho ho. All I could think about is National Lampoon's Christmas. Merry Christmas, kiss my ass, kiss his ass.
Best
But
movie ever.
best movie ever, and good old Uncle Eddie. But with that being said, yeah, that's why we say when you're looking at stress, and again, if you're on a Garmin platform, this is where you can kind of use it as a regulation tool for yourself because you can literally go to your phone and you can see your stress as it's adding up, as it's stacking during the day. Maybe you need to go out and go for a walk, not just for the athletic and the health benefits, but get out and walk, get some fresh air, get some, hopefully the sun's out and you're getting some vitamin D on your skin. Get away from the stress, manage it. Now, where it becomes a little bit, and I don't want to get down this bunny trail because I don't have it written down here, but it's because it's one that's very sensitive and we could do an entire show on it, is the depression associated with holidays. If you've just recently lost somebody or you've got somebody who has been diagnosed with a severe aggressive form of cancer and you're thinking this might be the last Christmas and that thought keeps recycling around. Again, you've got some family dynamics that maybe are a little tumultuous. And so you've got stress that goes in with that. And then eventually you get so overwhelmed with the stress, it becomes depressing. And that's something that getting out and walking, going out and getting away from the stress and you managing it off your Garmin, it's no different than driving your vehicle and you're driving it based on gauges. And that's why we put it on here, an increase or a decrease in stress, because let's assume that the interpersonal relationships are kind of maintaining themselves. You're eating good food and you're sleeping and you're hydrating and maybe even taking a power nap that you don't normally take. You may actually see stress levels come down during the holidays. It's very easy to say, oh, my stress is going to go up, but mainly we think about in-laws and outlaws. after today, hopefully everybody's understanding eating foods that you haven't eaten in a long time are going to be stressful on the system. Just
Yeah.
keep it all in perspective. Like you say, I'm not saying it's a bunch of double negatives. I think if you don't lean in on the holiday gifts that are around, pies and cakes and cookies, then I think you're missing out. And I know
Yeah.
there's people are going to ostracize me for saying that. You're supposed to be Mr. Athletic. And I'm like, I don't live in a glass house. I will tear up some brownies on the holidays. I will tear them up. I'll be the first to tell you.
Okay, that leads us to the last one, last bullet point on the list. And if you're not in the situation of the depression, like that you just explained,
Sure, sure.
with something going on in your life that is putting you in that state of mind, I think that we can all um, feel this one, and that is increased motivation and improved motivation. For me, the holidays is the time where I get to kind of let everything go at work. My business coming to the end of the year of my business, it's over for the year, right?
Yep.
I can actually relax and recharge my batteries and get motivated again. And this time of year is so crucial to me, and I'm sure it is for others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we look at motivation, this is where I would like to loop back around to the comment I said at the beginning of the pod, and that is, how does your life today look compared to what you wrote down when we asked the question, what does your perfect day look like? If you woke up independently wealthy, who would you hang out with? Where would you go? What would you eat? What would you do with your time? Who would be three other people you guys would choose to hang out with? And now compare that to who you spent yesterday with. Because when you're, and Dan, you said something that's very, very important that we share with all of our entrepreneurs and all of our certified coaches. How much money do you need to make? So let's just say for even numbers, you need to make 120 grand a year. Okay. Most people would think that that's 10 grand a month. And I always try to encourage them that's not 10 grand a month, because by the time you take a week off for Christmas, a week off for New Year's, a week off for Thanksgiving, and you take a week off for family vacation, that 12-month year is now an 11-month year. So now you've got to make that 120 grand over an 11-month period so that you have that time off. People go, why does that really matter? And you just said it without me even teeing you up for it. Why is it when you make a comment, we're at the end of the year? I don't give two shits about the work, right? I mean, it is what it is. You've got 2 weeks left in the year and you're like, it is what it is. Well, if I can get you to change that perspective, if you know you need to make 120 grand and you hit that number by June, you got the rest of the year off. Now, again, I don't want to act like I'm being idealistic. I know there's other elements that factor into that, right? We have impromptu interruptions, we have surprises, you have those rainy day funds for a reason. But where I want to go is the psychology side, the psychological side of the holidays. Dan, when you were leaving in seventh grade and you knew that you were on Christmas break and you had 2 weeks with no projects, no school, no quizzes, no nothing, you felt like you were floating on clouds. If I could get you to bottle that emotion up, and that's why I say that the improved motivation is an external characteristic and a behavior that is a byproduct of the holidays. Because for that period of time when you're with your friends and family, you're eating good food, you're sleeping, you might even be taking naps, you're exercising, and now you put all that together. Well, now that starts to emulate what somebody would tell me is their perfect day. So Dan, like we were saying, like when you had your multiple routes and you got this huge quota and you're just a hamster on a treadmill, compare that to what you're doing now where you're in control of your own destiny with your own businesses.
Yep.
It's a paradigm shift.
It is. It's such a free feeling,
Yes. Yes. And that's what I want people to take away on this last nugget of conversation in the seventh point associated with behavior in the holidays. Think about the times. If I were to ask you on a piece of paper, write down to me, or for me rather, write down for me the things that you loved about Thanksgiving. If I were just to pull a computer chip out and you were to say, Thanksgiving was awesome. All right. What constitutes awesome? Who were you with? What'd you do? What'd you talk about? What'd you eat? Where'd you go? Right. So now all of a sudden, Thanksgiving, I've got this laundry list of things, not me, you. I took the computer chip out of your brain. You're telling me that what made Thanksgiving awesome was that you and Ayla and your bride, you guys went to the park every day at 4 o'clock and you pushed Ayla in the swings. Well, I don't have it. I don't have children that are young enough to push in the swing anymore. So that doesn't resonate with me, but it doesn't make it wrong for you. So now we start saying, okay, what made an ideal Christmas? It was the smell of the fireplace. It was walking in the snow and hearing the snow under my feet. It was the white Christmas. I'm from Florida. I've only seen snow 3 times in my entire life, and I paid to see it every time. And I'm dead serious, right? So for me, I can't relate to somebody who says what would make my point is what makes an ideal Christmas for you? And if you take it away from the holidays, people go, well, that was a special time. Okay. What's the difference between June the 15th and December 25th? What's the difference between Thanksgiving Day and April 17th? What's the difference between December 31st and you know what I'm saying? And that's where I want people to leave this pod together. How far are you from living your perfect day? Not in a very fluffy, like unrealistic, but if we can just have 3 holidays during the year, that gets us pretty close to what that day of a perfect day looks like. What's the difference? What's keeping us from living that every single day? And it's not always easy, Dan.
No.
You and I've talked about it off the record, starting businesses, closing businesses, changing careers, changing paths. I was married for 25 years. That was all I knew. I married my high school sweetheart. You don't think a divorce was hard? And as I publicly share with our listeners, it was the longest, hardest 10 years of my life. It took me 10 years to get divorced. You know what I mean? And you start looking at that wasn't something that I never thought I was going to go there. And I had to get through it. Well, what did I start working on? And I can't take credit for this. My counselor said it is what's the price for freedom?
Yeah.
Right. No disrespect to my boy's mom. But what I'm saying is I needed to figure it out. And until I wrote it down on what I was looking for, my counselor said, okay, my counselor was with me. I was married for 25 years. I was in counseling for 15 of it. Okay. And I started going to my own counselor when I was going through my divorce. And he said, okay, so you're going to be officially divorced. What are you looking for? And at the time, I wasn't looking for anything. I was going to be my kid's dad. I was going to build businesses, and I was just going to retire in the city of Claremont. I lived on Lake Minneola. I was going to open water swim every day, bike every day, run every day, lift every day, be my kid's dad, right? I thought women had lost their marbles. They're all screwed in the head. My point is Mike, my counselor, said, what is it that you would be looking for in a female? Well, if I don't write it down, how do I go find it? And that's what I want people to think about with the holidays. If you're telling me these are the attributes of each holiday that you liked, what is it? What can you do to try to have that same sensation every day? And I'm going to say it just in closing here. That's why it's so important. If you were independently wealthy, who would you hang out with is always number one. Because Dan, for you and I prefer to be alone. Michaela and I, we're perfectly content, just the two of us going to dinner. We're not social butterflies. That's just not our thing. Nothing against those who it is. But I can tell you what's utopic for me is a quiet night at the beach with Michaela and our puppy, because our kids are grown up and off to college now. So we try to make that part of our reality every single day. Who would you hang out with? When you're with that person, what would you eat? What would you do? Where would you go? As dumb as it sounds, what clothes would you wear? What would you talk about when you get there? You see how this is, if you reverse engineer, you tell me what you like. Okay, let's build what you like. And for the sake of again, if you're not a motocross individual, apply this to any sport. But Dan, for the sake of our moto heads, right? What is the purpose of a factory rig? If you really step back and you're sitting on the outside of the awning and you're looking in that factory rig, what's the only focus of that factory rig? To create an environment of success. So take your favorite rider and imagine the gear guy or girl comes in and gives you a set of gloves that are too small. And Joe Shimoda only likes to wear white gloves, and you go in, you put blue gloves and they're too small. And you give them a pair of goggles without any lenses in them. And you get a seat, and the seat's 4 inches too high, and you got foot pegs that are too small. Would we go, wow, Tomac's being a little bitch because his seat's too high, his gloves are too small, his pegs are too small? But yet we would not expect anything except create an environment of success and give Tomac what he needs to compete at the level we know he's capable. But yet when we apply it to ourselves as individuals, we go, oh, that's asking too much.
Yeah.
Huh? That makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
Now,
It's wild, isn't it?
it is. And that's what's cool with working with elite athletes is you realize if Dungy wanted chicken cordon bleu, you can guarantee that in that KTM rig was going to be chicken cordon bleu. If Tomac wants bolognese, it's going to be bolognese. If Dean Wilson wants tacos, it's going to be tacos. Okay, well, if that's what Dean Wilson wants at the racetrack, what do you want at the racetrack? If that's what
Yep.
you want for dinner, what are you having for dinner? And
Exactly.
that's where you just have to keep zooming out on all this. And that's why these holiday behaviors I think are so powerful, because I find that this is the closest that we get every year when people are like, I'm very close to, I can once again savor it. Because, when you're in April or May, November feels like an eternity,
Yeah.
right? And now you're
Totally
in
does.
November, Halloween comes, and then it's New Year's.
Yep. It's
And then
quick.
we're like, dadgum, where'd that time go? And that's what I want to leave all of our listeners with is how close can you take and get to that perfect day? Well, right now you're going right through it, depending on when you're listening to this podcast and this webinar, right? When was the last time let's say that somebody's listening to this in a recording in May or June of next year. Don't wait till November, December, January to get it. Get a piece of paper, stop and think about last year and try to get inching closer to it starting tomorrow. So
Exactly.
a lot of good things, man. 20 years of research, 7 things. And I hope everybody has written them down and we'll take them and try to strive for them.
Well, Coach Robb, your knowledge and wisdom has yet again blown all of our minds. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our listeners, all of our subscribers on YouTube. Make sure you guys like and share. Leave the comments. We love them. Coach Robb, have a very Merry Christmas, and
You
all the
too, brother.
listeners have a great holiday.
Yep.
We'll see you actually again before New Year's, I believe. We
Yep.
believe we've got one more for the till the end of the year.
Yep.
And
We'll announce it. We'll try to get that announcement out on social media based on your schedule and my schedule. But that's our goal tentatively. But just like we were talking about, family will take precedence. So we'll see
absolutely.
what happens.
All right,
Thank
Coach
you,
Robb. Thank you
everybody.
so much. See
Happy
you guys on the
holidays.
next
Merry
one.
Christmas. Peace.